Hey everyone, Darren Eastman here, Product Manager for GitLab Runner. Hey, so for today's speedrun, we're just going to quickly follow up on the speedrun we had from last month. If you recall, we talked about using the GitLab Runner Fargate Custom Driver on AWS Fargate in order to run your CI jobs. Obviously, it's an MVC product that we released pretty recently, earlier this year, and it's meant to solve specific issues. So today I want to kind of build on that discussion. There's a very recent blog post that was released actually on Friday, July 31st. That talks about how to build containers with the AWS Fargate Custom Executor for GitLab Runner and AWS and CodeBuild. Let me just pop over to that blog post. And that blog post is written by Elliot Rushton and Ricardo Mendez. And so there's a quick shout out to those two chaps. They did some great work with getting this blog post done for us. And so what I want to just cover today really fast is just to go over a few key points. The first thing is just kind of a brief overview of a few of the options specific to Amazon Web Services and hosting your run on Amazon Web Services. So just kind of briefly touch on Elastic Compute or EC2, EKS, autoscaling the runner on AWS EC2 using the Docker machine pattern, the GitLab Docker machine pattern. And then also now, picking up from our discussion last time, autoscaling the run on AWS Fargate, specifically for Amazon Elastic Container Services, ECS, and that's really a mouthful. So just to kind of take a quick look at some of those diagrams, just as in terms of the brief overview of point number one here. I guess it's pretty straightforward, but just to recap, if you're on AWS as a self-hosted customer, you obviously have different solutions or different options in terms of hosting your runner. The most basic pattern is obviously installing and GitLab Runner on an EC2 instance. Then the other pattern is autoscaling the runner using the GitLab Runner autoscaling pattern that uses Docker machine. So in this example, as the diagram shows here, you're now hosting a GitLab Runner on an EC2 instance. We typically call this, in this scenario, we typically call the runner the manager. And then you're using a Docker machine executor that's configured for that GitLab Runner. And then you're able to spawn additional EC2 instances with GitLab Runner for executing your CI jobs. So that's one auto-scaling pattern on EC2, and specifically a Docker machine auto-scaling pattern. Other customers have obviously worked with auto-scaling patterns where you're just using native AWS auto-scaling groups. And then the third thing, and which we're kind of again talking about today, kind of again the follow-on to last month's speedrun, is using AWS Fargate for ECS, the pattern that we released a few months ago, as another option for addressing the ability to host your build platform on AWS in a scalable and hopefully cost-effective way. And so again, in this pattern, we follow the same sort of a basic construct as you see in the image above. You have an EC2 instance, you have the GitLab runner that's configured, in this case as the runner manager, because it's going to be used to spawn other CI build container tasks in this particular instance. The difference between this pattern and the one above it, where we are autoscaling on EC2, is that this GitLab runner is now configured to use the custom executor, and then that custom executor is then configured to use the new GitLab Fargate driver. And so some folks maybe have been following this very closely. The customer executor is the means by which we enable us to extend the GitLab runner to be used with platforms that we don't support natively. And we've got some documentation around that. There's a repo, and we'll probably touch a bit more on using the custom executor in subsequent speedruns or maybe full-blown demos. So then in this pattern, you can see the run manager on AWS EC2 instance, configured with the custom executor. Here's your Fargate driver, and then it's spawning your task on AWS Fargate to run jobs. So that's just kind of the first thing in sort of this high-level overview. Just wanted to recap, again, for customers that are looking to use AWS to host their runners, multiple various options that we support today to try to get that problem solved, right? How can I host my runners in AWS? But here are various patterns by which you can do so. So again, today we're going to be talking about Fargate again, and specifically the Fargate Custom Executor, specifically with CodeBuild, and we'll get to that here in a moment. So before we get there, just a few key points from the AWS community that has been following our recent posts regarding Fargate and some of those capabilities. So one customer or one community member rightly pointed out that, hey, on AWS today, I'm happy and fine. I'm using AWS EKS for my runners. I don't necessarily see a lot of value in moving to a Fargate solution. Yes, spot on. For those types of customers or users that are pretty comfortable using EKS, that's a pattern that they can continue using. No issues there. What we've heard from other customers though, and this is what drove our need to develop something for Fargate, is that they may not necessarily have the expertise, or they may be concerned about the long-term maintenance costs of trying to maintain EKS, whether it's on AWS or some other, specifically in this case AWS. And so they were looking for a solution where, hey, can I do something with Fargate, which, based on the material from AWS, reduces some of the overhead burden in terms of managing the underlying clusters. And so that's kind of what drove us to the Fargate solution for those types of customers. Second bullet point here, that community members are rightly pointing out. So the current run-on Fargate solution has a couple of key limitations, and this kind of relates back to the purpose of the blog post and our brief overview today. I'll try to keep it brief. And one of those limitations, the key one really, is that Docker and Dockers as a known limitation, that's probably the right terminology to use, but I'm just using it as a quote, is not supported on Fargate. And we can all surmise the number of reasons why that is. One community member was able to get pretty close with using Kaneko and the Fargate driver, but that did not succeed. So, a key CI/CD use case for most folks that are very well versed in CI/CD and DevOps is really this Docker and Docker use case, right? You want to build a container as part of the pipeline, part of the process, your deployment process. Well, if Fargate doesn't support that, then it makes Fargate untenable really for those types of CI/CD use cases. So it's definitely a key issue there with just using Fargate natively. And then the other thing that someone kind of called out, which I want to speak to, is, hey, they looked at some of the blog posts that we had released around getting to a completely serverless CI/CD solution using Fargate, and then using some other patterns where we remove the need to host the run on EC2 instance, and we were basically plugging the runner as a Fargate task itself. So everything was completely serverless, and then having that Fargate task for the runner manager be initiated using webhooks and with Lambda functions. So really, truly, kind of that first foray into a 100% serverless CI/CD build solution using AWS constructs. And one community member rightly asked the question, hey, why are you guys spending all this time investing into something that's somewhat bespoke? I'm on AWS today, and why just not use native AWS tooling to get the same sort of functionality, things like CodeBuild and code pipeline and so on. And yeah, that's an interesting point. And I think generally speaking, if you're a customer user and you're all in on AWS, that's the right approach to use. And you can use AWS for your entire DevOps, for a lot of your use cases relates to DevOps, and there's some other tooling right now that AWS is rolling out that's going to be helpful in those patterns. But if you're like most of all GitLab users and customers, you probably have different patterns to support. You have on-premise deployment, you're probably supporting multiple clouds. You're looking for a different solution in the entire DevOps lifecycle. And so if you're needing that flexibility, which of course we all know GitLab provides, then you're probably not going to be locked in or looking to be locked into all of the AWS construct, and you're looking for flexibility, especially when it comes to hosting a CI/CD build servers or agents on AWS. And so that's kind of the reason why we have spent a lot of time trying to come up with solutions to make it as easy as possible for end customers and users to host their runners in a cost-effective, scalable, easy to manage, very frictionless way in AWS. And we'll continue down that path in the future. We're going to be investing heavily in making the maintenance, the enterprise management and maintenance of runners at scale as easy as possible, because we recognize that for a number of folks that need to self-host their CI/CD platforms, that's something that they want to be as low cost and as easy as possible. So just really quickly, just want to call out, before I wrap up the last 2 minutes of my speedrun, I think I'm going over a lot of time for what a speedrun should be. There are a few key blog posts I'm just trying to collate every time I have one of these. They're kind of all around in the same topic area, right? Today we're going to be briefly reviewing the how to build containers with the AWS Fargate Custom Executor for GitLab Runner and AWS CodeBuild. That's kind of the focus on today's sort of quick speedrun overview, and that's specifically around going to be helping us address the Docker and Docker implementation. Again, that's the brand new blog post that we just came out with on July 31st, just last Friday. Then there are some other blog posts that are already out there on the GitLab.com site. There's how to create a Kubernetes cluster on Amazon, EKS, and GitLab. It's a great post that was written by one of our GitLabbers. Very easy to follow, very easy to set up and get going. There's also a blog post by a community member, best practices to keep your Kubernetes runners moving. So for folks that are in sort of the Kubernetes camp on AWS, 2 great blog posts there that shows you how to get going on Kubernetes on AWS or EKS to be specific for your runners. And then autoscaling GitLab CI on Fargate, the newest construct that we're just releasing. So with that, I'm just the third thing that we're gonna cover in this speed post is just a quick overview of a few of the key setup steps that are required to get going with the examples in the blog post. And so let me pop over to the blog post pretty fast and get close that. And so this is a brilliant blog post that again was written by Elliot Rushton, Ricardo Mendez of CI&T, and it's how to build containers with the AWS Fargate Custom Executor. So for today's speedrun, I'm not going to go through all the steps. When you first read the blog post, there are a couple of steps in here to follow. At first you see it's pretty involved, but you realize that it's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to touch on those that may require a quick highlight, that need a bit of highlighting. So in terms of overall architecture, again, this builds on the pattern that I just showed earlier. In this pattern, we're keeping the construct pretty straightforward and pretty similar, so it's not overwhelming. We have the GitLab runner installed on EC2 instance. It's configured to use the custom executor and then configured to use the AWS Fargate driver. Then we have our build containers ready to go as tasks, if you will, on AWS Fargate. So what happens here is when a job comes in, the runner on the EC2 instance will say, okay, great, I've got a job. The Fargate driver will initiate the creation of these additional tasks or containers just for the life of that job. But what we've done here, and what the folks have done here, is you've got this additional construct now where there is this CI coordinator 02, and that's the purpose of this blog post. That's also enabling you now to take whatever you need in terms of your Docker construct and build your Docker file and push it to AWS CodeBuild. So you can get sort of that Docker and Docker functionality using the AWS build constructs. So in terms of prerequisites, again, it builds on the work we've done before with the AWS Fargate driver. You would previously have installed a runner on EC2, which is this picture right here. You would have installed the Fargate driver. And you want to make sure that you have, in terms of permissions, the right AWS IAM user permissions to allow you to create and configure S3 build resources. Those steps here in step 1 are pretty straightforward, but for most folks that are familiar with AWS, and the steps are, as laid out here, enable you to do this manually. Again, you can of course automate all these steps. So there's nothing much to call out here. You're basically creating an S3 bucket and you're giving it a name. In step 2, you simply create an AWS CodeBuild project. Nothing too intricate here. The only thing it's that typically when you're doing creating an AWS CodeBuild project in AWS, there just is typically a few more steps. You can just pop up that console so you can take a look. You create a new project, and you can see there's like things like the project name, descriptions, some other fields that you typically have to fill out. And so that's why popping back over to the blog post, there are a few more steps in the blog post. And again, it's very straightforward. You're basically just following everything here and filling out the right configuration settings to get your CodeBuild project set up in order to complete the tutorial in the blog post. Step 3 is building a CI container image. What does this mean? So just to recap, I'm going to pop back over here just to the diagram. And so the CI container image is what's going to be used to create the task on Fargate, the thing that actually builds your jobs, right, or executes your jobs on Fargate. And that's one thing with Fargate. With the Fargate construct, there's a bit more work involved up front in that you have to create your CI, you have to create your CI build containers. And at the moment, there's just no way of getting around that because we've got to do some things in terms of injecting SSH keys and doing some things to the runner. So you have to build that container in order to use Fargate in this construct. And so that's what this is calling out here. And step 3 is building the CI container image. And it's basically giving you an example of what you need to add to your Docker file in order to do so. So you build your Docker image and you add this construct and you're good to go. What I've done and when I'm doing my testing, and folks can have different ways of addressing this. In my testing, I have a GitLab repo here. I'm just popping over so you can take a quick look. In this GitLab repo, you can see that I have a Docker file. It's got some stuff in there, and then for the purpose of this demo, you can see, I can zoom in. You can see I've added the command. So what I do in my particular case here is I've got everything in this GitLab repo. I then use, I can actually just show this to you really fast. I think it's in here. Yeah, it's kind of in here. I actually use GitLab. In some cases, I push the image direct. I use GitLab's repository. In some cases, I push it to AWS. But you can see that I use GitLab to go ahead, lint my image, build it, add the stuff that I need. In this case, I'm actually pushing it directly to ECS, or ECR in this case, sorry. So it's just pretty straightforward. So you create a repo for your Docker images that you're going to be using for your CI build containers. That's really the easiest way to do it. So at least that's version control as well. Again, following the same, I guess, infrastructure as code paradigm. So everything is in code. So it's pretty straightforward. And it gives me a lot of flexibility. And I can come in here, I can change the branch. And if I want to push it to a different repo, I can. If I want to add something to the Docker image, I can. Even though at first you might be thinking, well, I've got to maintain these build container images. Again, once using these constructs, you realize, oh, it's really not that bad. So that's the one thing I just wanted to call out here is just, how do you build that container image? I think it's pretty straightforward. I just wanted to call that out. And then in step 4, you add a CodeBuild configuration to the repo. Specifically in this case, and I would be remiss by not calling out here that later on in the blog post, there's actually a link to an example repo, so you can just link it in an example repo and pull in the code. But what it's talking about here is that in the project that you're using for testing out this demo, this is what you would want to add this build spec YAML file, is what AWS CodeBuild would be looking for. I can quickly, I guess, pop over to my repo and you can see it. Yeah, you can see, and I copied this directly from the repo, so it's a very straightforward file. So you're creating a repo, you can fork the repo, that example that's later on in the blog post, whatever makes sense for you, but that's basically what that's calling out there. And then finally, you set up your GitLab CI job, right? There's really nothing much to call out here. The one thing is that this at first looks pretty gnarly, but again, all of the example scripts are included in the linked repo below. So it's pretty straightforward. So you don't have to change any of this code to get going. You just, as I mentioned earlier, you just fork the repo, set up your GitLab YAML file, and you should be good to go. And then you add a job to the resulting container. So once everything is set up, all the steps are complete. The source repository, as the blog post is mentioned, will be structured as follows. You'll have, as you would expect, your GitLab YAML file, the build spec.yaml, the CodeBuild.sh file, which is referenced here. Again, you're not creating this yourself. You don't have to change it to get going. You just copy and paste this, and then your Docker file. And then the final step is, of course, you add a job to the GitLab YAML. This is the job. You can see it's very straightforward. All it's doing, it's saying stage deploy stage. It's going to call zip to bundle up the zip file, to bundle up the build spec.yaml file. Then it's going to use the AWS CLI to configure the default region and then copy the resulting zip file over to CodeBuild. So and then finally in the blog post, it talks about how you actually set up your AWS credentials. I'm not going to cover that so much. That's pretty straightforward. So now step 7 is showtime. So but once you finish steps 1 through 7, you're ready to test this pattern and ready to test this configuration. So just to highlight, so just to recap, right? So the CI job step is step 5. It presses the resulting container image build into build.zip. Build.zip is an upload to S3 bucket, which we created in step 1. CodeBuild sh starts a CodeBuild job based on the product created in step 2. And then finally, CodeBuild job downloads GitLab runner builds is from S3 compresses from the build spec file. And so what this looks like in practice, and I actually have a few example pipelines from when I ran through this before. I'm not going to run through it today because I changed some of the configurations. But you can see here, here's a good example. This one was actually run using a runner that was actually on AWS. So I was using a GitLab runner configured on AWS Fargate because I wanted to test that pattern as well to actually go through this end-to-end cycle. And with this particular example, you can see it was a runner on Fargate. And then as you get through here, it's doing the steps where it's zipping up the file, and then it's calling AWS CLI to do the configuration, the S3 copy, then the bash file copy, and so on. And at the end of, once this is done, what you'll notice if you've set this up properly, I don't have a CodeBuild project set up right now, but I do still have my S3 bucket, so I'll pop back over here. Going to S3 bucket, this is GitLab runner builds. In my case, actually that one did work from what was did. And so you can see the build.zip file was uploaded as part of the end-to-end process. So just to recap today's code build, and kind of the purpose of it is to kind of summarize here one more time. So this blog post, again, just came out July 31st. It's talking about how to build containers with the AWS Fargate Custom Executor for GitLab Runner and AWS CodeBuild. And the whole purpose, as the intro to the blog post mentions, is to try to address that limitation on Fargate of not supporting Docker and Docker. And so we hope that this is somewhat helpful and that the community members can take this pattern forward. Again, we recognize that this is there's no one size fits all when it comes to hosting the runners on Fargate. But as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to provide as much reasonable options that customers are asking us for to simplify their management of runners on the major cloud platforms. We've been focused obviously on AWS Fargate and AWS and Fargate for the last couple of speed runs, and you'll see as we move on later on in the year, and we'll start talking about other cloud platforms and some of their constructs as well. But for right now, we just wanted to cover this. And then so lastly, to wrap up today's speed run, and I know it wasn't so heavy in the demo today, I just want to again call out some of the other blog posts. So this is the blog post that was on the 31st. The one I called up earlier, how to create a Kubernetes cluster on Amazon EKS, a brilliant blog post. It summarizes some of the key pieces of documentation we already have in GitLab. But again, it's a really quick, nice reference in terms of if you just want to follow something very simply and want to explore using Kubernetes on EKS using our integrated solution. Very nice blog post to follow there. If you want to get a little bit deeper in terms of Kubernetes on AWS, I really recommend this other blog post as well, which is best practices to keep your Kubernetes runners moving. Has really solid stuff here, and I believe if I recall correctly, there may also be a video link in here. I can't remember if there is one, but this is really solid for folks that actually there's really solid for folks that are have gotten a little bit more advanced in exploring Kubernetes, runners Kubernetes on AKS. And then this was just the original entry-level blog post that when we first released the AWS Fargate driver, just kind of announcing that and telling you how to get things set up. So just in closing and to recap, so again, if you're a user, a customer of GitLab, and you're trying to figure out a way to host your runners on AWS, we have a number of different constructs and that we support today. And we're building additional capabilities into some of those constructs. We know we have work to do when it comes to getting you to a long-term 100% serverless solution, but we think we have some great building blocks in order to do so. So to recap, we've got support for EC2, very basic pattern. We have support for EKS. We have support for autoscaling using our Docker machine pattern. And we also have support for autoscaling using Fargate on Elastic Container Services. That's the newest pattern, the MVC pattern that was just released. Next time around, we'll try to find something very interesting for speedruns. Until next time, talk to you soon. Cheers.